Joining us right now, Americans for Tax Reform President Grover Norquist joining the conversation. Grover, nice to see you. Thanks for joining us.
Certainly.
Go through the budget for us. What strikes you most?
Well, when Trump was running, and even when he won, a lot of his critics in the Republican Party said he's going to be a big spender. Well, let's take a look at this budget. Not only has he been a solid conservative on judges and personnel and his tax reduction proposal, but this is a Ronald Reagan budget reduction. Let's stop spending so much money and get people off of welfare rather than get more people trapped into welfare. It is a very reasonable budget. It's one that official Washington is going to hate because there is a lot of special interest money that's being cut back in this budget.
What about the projections on growth? 3% economic growth. Is that outside of forecast? Is that too optimistic in terms of when to expect growth, Grover?
Not if we get the tax cut that looks anything like what Paul Ryan and President Trump are talking about. If you take the corporate rate from 35% down to 20 or 15, they've been projecting less than 2%, which is what 8 years of Obama gave you. Let's remember that at the end of the Carter years, they told us limits to growth. There's no more growth anymore. Well, Reagan cut taxes, and we got not 3% growth, 4% growth for the next 6 to 8 years. I think 3% growth understates what this economy can do if we continue the deregulation that the president has gotten going, and we let people have permits to build everything from pipelines to power plants, rather than have a war on infrastructure, as Obama did for 8 years, but rather get out of the way of infrastructure being built so it can be built, and lower tax rates. I think 4% is completely reasonable. They're sticking in 3, I don't know, maybe to not be criticized by the left. They'll be criticized by the left for saying 3 is too much.
Yeah, but Grover, I would say nonpartisan economists look at this 3% growth rate and say, based on the growth in the working age population, which is barely growing at this point, that without that wellspring of workers, to use the Wall Street Journal's language, or some sort of newfound productivity in the economy, 3% is not achievable. So that's not coming from the left or people on the right who don't like the president's budget. But another thing that he deserves criticism for from conservatives, not touching Social Security, not touching Medicare, which he did talk about on the campaign trail, but then also throwing in there what is essentially a new entitlement, which is paid parental leave when you have a kid, federally mandated paid parental leave.
Well, I'm not a fan of mandating benefits for people's at work. People should make their own decisions about whether they'd rather have cash or particular targeted benefits. Social Security, any reform of Social Security requires 60 votes, so that's just off the table. It'd be silly for anybody to start a conversation on that. George Bush threw away his second term because he spent 6 months negotiating with no Democrats that were ever going to vote for any reform in Social Security, and it took 60, so nothing happened. That was completely predictable. Trump is not running down that rabbit hole. On Medicare, I think we need to reform it over the long term. That doesn't bring immediate savings, but we did save net present value $3 trillion in Medicare back with the Murray-Ryan budget fix a few years ago. So you can make small changes over a long period of time that net present value tremendously reduce the unfunded liabilities you have. We have millions of Americans that could enter the workforce. Not 18-year-olds, but 30-year-olds and 40-year-olds and 50-year-olds, because the labor participation rate during the Obama years continued to collapse. It's supposed to spring back during a recovery. We had 8 years of a very weak recovery, and people left the workforce. So it's not that we don't need immigrants to come in and fill that up. We've got people that were pushed out of the labor market by lousy economics for 8 years now. And that can come back. You can have a lot more workers in this country. We're not short workers. We've thrown them out, pushed them out of the labor market, but they can come back in. They did with the Reagan recovery.
Yeah, I mean, this is a list of priorities. It's going to look very different. How do you think it looks different once it gets marked up?
Well, we'll see. I mean, different spending interests have different amount of power in this town. for any Republican who wants to criticize. I mean, this will be an all-Republican budget.
Yeah.
You're not going to get D votes
exactly.
for actually
Grover,
reforming
let me
government.
ask you before you go about the CBO score on the health care plan. Today, we're getting that score from the CBO in order for this bill from the House to be passed over to the Senate. Real quick on the CBO score.
We simply need it to be scored so that 11 years out, it is deficit neutral from previous predictions. I believe it will be. We'll see how CBO made some changes to allow Obamacare to go in. I hope they're not playing politics against reforming Obamacare.
And it will also tell us the number of people who will be without insurance.
Well, but watch. The last time CBO did this, they did something very dishonest. They counted people who were no longer forced to buy Obamacare's product that they didn't want. And they said, if you don't force them, they'll quit. And they'd say, those people are losing their health care.
Right. That's what Dagan, you brought up a number of times.
That was really dishonest on the part of CBO. Shame on them for doing that.
Grover, thanks very much. Thanks for weighing in this morning.
You got it.
Grover Norquist joining us there. Coming up